My research is truly practitioner-driven. The reason why I say that is because it was a focus group that led me to this research. And during my qualitative research, and Dick Boland and Sherry know this very well because they were my advisors, we looked at enterprise architecture programs within the federal government. And we had looked at numerous audits that showed there was very slow maturity of those programs despite their intrinsic value to the federal government. So what exactly are enterprise architecture programs? There's enterprise architecture as a discipline, and there's enterprise architecture as a program. And I always make sure that I differentiate between the two. As a discipline, it's a strategic alignment tool. So you align IT strategy with business strategy. That's the very basic. An enterprise architecture program is really a program office which incorporates business expertise, accounting, IT, and you make sure that you align all those, so that you develop business cases, you strategically align everything, and you make sure that there's value articulation of what you do. So, in 1996, a report was prepared by then Senator William Cohen and Congressman Klinger. And they sounded an alarm at how much the federal government was spending on IT. And the reason was each and every functional head in the government had an IT budget. So you can imagine how many functions exist in a typical agency. And you have everyone acquiring IT applications, infrastructure, as a siloed organization. So the Act mandated each and every agency to establish an enterprise architecture program, appoint a chief information officer, appoint a chief architect to integrate all this, and they placed the budget under the CIO. In 2001, an audit report showed that 87% of the agencies had failed to comply with that requirement. They totally ignored. Why? The report said they were reporting to Congress. They were not reporting to the executive. Who is the appointing authority? The executive. So Congress had no punitive powers. So the government intervened. The executive rather intervened in 2002. And what they did, they moved the reporting of these programs to the Federal Office of Management and Budget. Now they had teeth because they could fire, they could cut budgets. Somehow there was a higher level of compliance. Now, what I'll point to here is two very important things. Let's look at this. A report showed that by 1999, just slightly over 35% of US citizens expected to interact with the government using the internet. Federal IT executives were on the defensive about this kind of money. The question was, with this kind of money being spent by the government, what did they have to show for this? Their argument, and this is now the theory that I'm testing here, they argued this investment is justified because they improved customer satisfaction. That's exactly what the argument here is. And so we set out testing this particular theory. Does this program maturity really drive that customer satisfaction? Now, but this study is going to be two-part. Remember that in my qualitative research, I had collected all this data from these federal agencies. And they were interested in, okay, we've given you about 20 factors that affect our EA programs. Can you do some research on that and tell us which ones are most significant? So despite the fact that I only wanted to focus on this relationship, I still went ahead at least and tested for that audience, what are the factors? So these are the research questions. The factors that influence maturity, if there's in fact any relationship between maturity and customer satisfaction, and if this particular relationship either weakens or strengthens post-government intervention in 2002. And then also we wanted to find out, did this intervention actually moderate that relationship or not? So this was the research model. Now all these factors we had already found most of them within the literature. But despite that, we still put them all, we pulled them all together as IVs and still tested them against EA maturity. So the most significant ones that were these ones right here. And we wanted to also test whether this institutional intervention did in fact have any relationship. Now the most interesting thing is that the program level factors turned out to be insignificant. That is one finding that I might want to look at later on, but they turned out to be less significant than most of the other organizational level factors. Now, this is just a microscopic look at the factors that were significant. Mission diversity in any normal organization, this would actually be business units, basically, because you might have disparate business units and each have disparate missions. So you have a conglomerate, one is manufacturing, another is a service organization. They might have two different types of missions. So the higher the number of missions, the higher the complexity. Diversity is exactly what we mentioned. Each of those functional heads had budgets of their own. So there were turf wars, as we saw, and control. So there was incoherent decision making. Structural diversity means the number of installations, regional sites, regional offices, and each of these had their own installations, as we say. And then age, this one goes without saying, this is about the inertia. Now, where did we get our data from? Most of the data came from OMB, and of course, as you can see, they were really happy to give me all the data I needed. Now, our dependent variable is captured from the America Consumer Satisfaction Index. Now, this is conducted jointly by the University of Michigan's Ross School of Business and a number of private sector institutions, which every time you visit a government office, either physical offices or online, they do conduct surveys. So it's upwards of 15 million, I believe, every quarter. So it's a very reliable site. The Code of Federal Regulations, this was for the regulatory requirements. We looked at each and every agency, how many regulations they had, and how it impacted. Of course, the rest we've already talked about, the GAO report. The GSA reports talks about the expenditure in terms of the facilities Inspector Generals and Congressional Budget Office, of course. So the hypotheses we're testing were, one, that maturity will positively drive customer satisfaction. The other is that the intervention will have a positive effect. And the other is that the intervention will lead to higher EA maturity. And what did we find? So when we ran multiple regression, this is what we found. We found size, structural diversity, mission, and age was significant. But then you have to remember, the dependent variable in this case was EA maturity, which is a categorical variable. So the only way we could reliably test for that was to use multinomial regression, which then treats the dependent variable as a categorical variable. And using that, we actually also control, sorry? Yes, multinomial regression. So with that, we also controlled for organization factors. So we removed size from here and decided to use it as a control variable, and budget, jurisdiction, and autonomy, and regressed with the others. Now, what turned out significant was structural, which was rather interesting because we had just mentioned about it, that structural was there. And then we tested, now this e-government, as it were, is what we're using as a marker for the executive intervention, because that marked the parting point between the old and the new order. Now, for testing the hypothesis, this was a rather interesting discussion we had with my advisors. This was key. This is central to this paper. And the question was, we have longitudinal data. We have data all the way from 1999 till 2008. And the question was, how could we better extract that data to amplify that relationship? How can we prove that EA maturity actually drives customer satisfaction? And so we had to look at ways that we could do it at different times. So the best way to approach this was for us to use a time lag dependent variable. And the only way that we could use that was the equation was built in such a way that we would be using the current satisfaction and then regressing against prior satisfaction and EA maturity. So for the first model, so we built 3 different models. So the first model, we had the DV as sat of 08, 05 and 08, and then we had the IVs of satisfaction of 02, 05, and IV of maturity 02, 05. And as you can see, the R square turned out significant. The T stats and the F stats actually did prove that. So, we could start seeing that, yes, the argument does hold water, that EA maturity did actually drive satisfaction. These are the coefficients for that particular model. Then the second model, we decided to use a rolling averages. So the rolling averages meant that what we're doing is, with the time lag dependent variable, what we were looking at was, we were using the DV and then going 3 years back, we're using rolling averages over those 3 years. And as you can see, it still turned out significant R squares. The beta, in this case, yes? Yes. So it was much more significant. Now, the interesting thing is, remember this, one of the things we are testing was whether this relationship became stronger after the intervention. And now it's becoming stronger as time goes by. So that was very, very encouraging. As you can see, the significance was major. And the dependent variable, of course, like we mentioned, was a SAT. Now, in one of the tests, the interesting thing is that the maturity coefficient turned out a negative beta. And Carly wrote to me and asked me, can you find out why it showed a negative beta? And the question was whether, the variance had been sucked out by the previous satisfaction. So we went ahead and said, okay, why don't we come up with a third model where we're only going to use EA maturity and as the IV, and then test it again, that dependent variable. And as you can see, something significant started coming out. Even though, of course, we could see, and we kind of expected that it wouldn't be as strong. The good thing is that the R square still held. Okay, I know that Carly told me earlier on that it's very unusual anyway in studies in IT to get very strong R squares. And that is normal and it's understandable. But pretty much we did manage to prove, based on the statistics, that the theory actually holds true. These guys were right in claiming that EA maturity, in fact, does drive customer satisfaction. So we did prove that. Did we also prove that institutional intervention would have a positive effect? Pretty much from the data we could see that. That institutional intervention did have an effect. Now, there is another side to that. Yes, there is another side to that. It's important to remember that in the pre-intervention period, each agency was acting as a silo. They were vertically maturing their own, or rather, horizontally maturing their own enterprise architecture programs. In the post-period, courtesy of e-government intervention, they were forced to start sharing infrastructure. Now it was a federal enterprise architecture program, not a siloed one. And that is courtesy also of September 11. You heard from the news that the CIA had their own database, the FBI had their own database, everyone else had their own database. There was no sharing of information. So this new era, brought in, or rather ushered in this new concept of shared infrastructure, shared information, and that kind of minimized the number of programs, so they were able to better mature. So Please read this, that the maturity did not mean all agencies were maturing. As they moved into that period, there were lesser programs, but they were gaining higher maturity. And that was reflecting the higher satisfaction. And I believe I'll stop here and field any questions. Yes, sir?
I think if you go back to your slide, slide number 2. Number 2.
Yes.
The agency satisfaction, the customer satisfaction,
Yes.
your graph,
Yes.
and your EA maturity. You notice something that is happening there's somewhere your customer satisfaction flattens out. And if I'm using some lag, I can relate the slope up there. I can relate the flat here. But when I come to your result, if you go back to your model, your results. There is this one, there is by up. This is not significant. This one now. Your EA maturity is negatively related to satisfaction, and it is only significant at 10%.
Yes.
And I'm worried about that because EA maturity is supposed to impact positively. So it looks like it's the inverse of what you had hypothesized.
It's inverse. And you have to remember that part of this exercise is that we're also controlling for that. If you looked at that and you looked at that, you'd see the difference.
You move too fast.
Oh, okay. I said, okay, if you looked at this, the control variables weren't there.
Just a minute. Okay. And still, even there, look at your maturity.
Yeah.
EA maturity.
It's still negative.
It's still negative. It's still insignificant. The blue, go down.
Okay.
There you are. It's still insignificant, and it's negative.
As
Go
a
to-
lag.
Yes. Now, if you go to the controls, I have no problem with that. Actually, when you introduce the controls, looks like it improves a little bit. Your R square improves a bit. Your model fit, but still, EA maturity is still on the borderline,
Yes, it is.
and it is negative.
It is true that.
So that's what I was asking. I didn't get your explanation of how EA maturity impacts on satisfaction, customer satisfaction, negatively, which means the higher the maturity, EA maturity, the lower the customer satisfaction. That's what I'm battling with.
Right, and that is why that flat slope was there.
Yeah, they're converging, right?
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. The result does not agree with what is up there.
Is that across in the past?
I wouldn't quite say so. Are you looking at it holistically? Also, you looking at the F stat and the T stat, or just focusing on?
So I'm looking at everything. The R is the overall fit, and the T's are the specific. They are the coefficients. No, it's okay. I think it's all right.
What we're looking at was the significance of the
No,
relationship.
I'm not. What I needed is just you to explain, just to bring me to speed on what that implies. But it's okay. The implication of that result. That's okay.
Right. But the question is, are you satisfied that there's significant relationship between the two?
Oh no, I've not seen it. It's not there.
It's not there.
Yeah, statistically, it's not there.
I would argue that yes, it is there.
No, look at your t-value. It is 0.055.
Right.
So that's
Which is significant.
No, it's not.
Anything under
5%.
1.
It should be above 5%.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
But if you decide to go to 1, you can go
Yes,
to
it's not a borderline.
You can go to the borderline test.
So you're arguing that 0.55 is not significant.
Huh?
So your argument
That
is
after you control. Before you control, it is not.
Okay.